Hello, it's Thursday. So last week we made some little dragons, and this week I'm going to be doubling this dragon to make a bigger one. Now I do go over the process that I'm going to be using today to double this pattern in my bigger video, but I do want to just amend that slightly before we get going today. I still find this process to be a little bit more of an art form than like a straight logical formula. And I think this project is really going to highlight some of that, just because like some stitches don't translate directly and you still need to kind of understand what stitches are doing what to form the shape in order to be able to manipulate them and double them in size. And on top of that, there's just always multiple ways to achieve the same shape, but I'm blathering on. You can work on your little dragon while I make my big dragon. This is not a pattern video, but the pattern notes will be made available to my patrons at the end, because I am going to take copious amounts of notes. So what does doubling a pattern actually mean? So this is the base pattern, right? Now when you double it, you make it twice as long as well as twice as wide. And I conveniently have two dragons here to kind of make that a little bit more obvious. So it's going to be doubled in every possible dimension. Now, will that be big enough for us? It's hard to tell at this point, but we're going to just start there and just sort of see how we feel about it. So the steps for doubling a pattern are very simple in concept, but they can get more complicated in execution. You'll see. So step one is you double the total number of rows, and that is what is giving us double the length. And I'm going to do that by just inserting a new row before each of the existing rows.
All right, now there's our pattern, and we're going to number it and add some rows. Now the row numbers are going to shuffle around a little bit, so don't worry about them too much. And that's going to take this 50 row pattern and turn it into a 100 row pattern, which is a lot. That's a lot of rows.
So step number two is, of those existing rows, I'm going to double the total required number of stitches. And what that's going to do is double our width. So if I didn't double those numbers, we'd end up with something as skinny as this one, but like stretched over twice the length. Whereas if we double the row total as well, we end up with something that is proportionate to our original and basically twice as big.
So I'm just going to go through and double each one now, which is going to take me a moment. I'm going to just focus my efforts on just this head section first, because like this is interesting, but it's not 100 rows worth of interesting. At least I think so anyway. And what we are doing here is known as live math, and it is always a mistake. So there we go. That's just the head section done. Someone remind me to go back and do the rest of it, because otherwise it's going to get confusing. So step 3 is just sort of fill in the gaps that are obvious. I'm sort of bundling some of our original steps together a bit here to whiz through the nerdy stuff. So in this case, the first lot of obvious gaps are here, where we're working single crochet, and it's to single crochet the whole way around. So I can change this whole row, the existing row that is, each one of these to 36 stitches. And the gaps in between them, we're not trying to do any shaping, so all of those will be 36 as well. And the other sort of obvious one that I can hit really early on is the starting point here. So obviously the magic ring won't happen in row 2. It'll have to happen in row 1. And we could double this by making it a magic ring of 12, but that will leave a hole in the middle. Instead, we're going to use what we already know about how a lot of crochet patterns start, and start with a magic ring of 6. But then we want the next row to be 12 stitches, and it's pretty easy to work out how to get from 6 stitches to 12. You use 6 increases. It's just like solving a series of little puzzles, and you only have to solve one row at a time. Row 4 is just single crochet around for a new total of 12 stitches, so we change that to 12 single crochet as well. And the rest all have a little bit of shaping going on.
If you'll indulge me, I'm actually super interested in this subject, so we're going to talk about a little bit of nerd stuff for a second, because there are a whole lot of different ways that we can times a basic row like this by 2. So you could multiply the number on the outside of the brackets by 2, or you can multiply the numbers on the inside of the brackets by 2. Now, the first way, as you can see on the left, is for if we want even growth the whole way around our round. You do have to be mindful of things like slope when doing that though. It's not always going to be the most accurate way to do this. Whereas option 2 is going to create distinct kind of bulges to the work, and is also not necessarily the most correct way to do all shapes. So there is actually a third option, and that is you start by timesing the numbers in the brackets by 2, and then you split whatever increases or decreases are happening over 2 rows, which will maintain the slope of the work, which we have discussed a lot in other videos and still preserve like the intention of the original pattern.
I'm going to try and work through these from top to bottom to add like a little bit of sense to this whole process. So row 3 here is trying to go from 12 single crochet to 12 single crochet with no additional shaping, so that'll be 12 single crochet. Then we start hitting rows where there's a little bit more shaping, and I'm going to use row 6 as an example. I'm probably going way too far into this for most of the people who watch this channel, so we'll just do this one row like this and then I promise I'll move on into the more interesting stuff. We can see it wants us to have 16 stitches and the original pattern is only for 8. So we're going to start by multiplying each of the elements by 2, giving us 2 single crochet, 2 increases, 6 single crochet, and then 2 increases. Next we're checking for 2 things. First of all, that it uses 12 stitches, as that's what we have from the previous row. And secondly, that it results in 16 stitches at the end, as that's what we need for this row. And this new row does pass both of these checks. However, doubling the number of increases that we've used in a row like that changes the sloping and it's going to create 2 bulges at the top. So instead, I'm going to split those increases over 2 rows, preserving the intention of the shape. And I probably should have done this shaping across rows 5 and 6, so I'm sorry if it's confusing that I've used row 6 and row 7 instead. That's just what I mean when I say there's so many different ways to create the same shape. So yeah, with that done, I'm just going to extrapolate that out to the rest of the head.
Alright, I promise that's the end of the nerd stuff.
37, 38, 39, 77, 111, 139, 180. So there's the head, and you'll see there that that is what double looks like. See there we've got, if I'm in the frame it doesn't want to focus. Double the length, double the width. It's double the volume as well, though it's a little hard to tell. So I'm now just going to jump back into my Word doc and finish calculating up the rest of the body. And then we'll see where we really stand here. This is coming out a pretty good size, I think. Like, I was worried that it was going to be a little bit small and we were going to have to turn this into like a quadruple size thing. But no, it's going to be about 50 centimeters long. I don't really need a meter long one at this point. Though, like, watch this space. That, like, stranger things have happened. You've got some audacity to you, don't you? You are much, much bigger than you were supposed to be. What is going on? Okay, so I've let the opening of this drift and warp too far off to one side. So I'm just gonna have to frog all the way back, maybe 3 or 4 rows, and just try and correct that because currently we are twisting way more significantly than I thought we were, which is going to be a problem. So I'm gonna just frog that back, unfortunately, and we're gonna try it again. I don't know if you guys can actually see the difference there, but it is now lining up centered. So we can keep going. All of these weird sort of angles and shapes and stuff must have been present on the little one. You just couldn't tell until you magnified them again. So while he's looking a little duck-like at the moment, we're going to cover him with a lot more stuff than we did the little one anyway. So you're not really going to be able to tell in the end. Okay, so it's the next day and I went ahead and I finished this off camera. So there it is in relation to the original. Looking huge. Technically we could go a size larger with it if we were so inclined. Technically we could go full on body pillow if we wanted to. But I think the size is good for what we're doing today, which brings us to the legs. Now the legs are a great example of details that don't really scale cleanly just by mathematically timesing everything by 2. mathematically timesing everything by 2. You know what I'm talking about. Because we've used these double trebles for the toenails, that doesn't really translate when you're just doubling things, and I have proof. This is what happens when you just times the foot by 2. It's like, it looks a little bit like it's been stung by a bee. So yeah, I need to come up with a different solution for his toenails. In fact, I'm probably gonna have to like reconceive a lot of the details that I used on the little one, because a lot of them won't just cleanly translate to a larger size. So that's kind of the next challenge of this project. Now I am also running out of our color here, but I think I have a lot of this color, which is, I believe, why I picked this red to start with. In case it wasn't immediately obvious, I don't think I've actually spoken about this, I am aiming for a slightly more traditionally Chinese vibe with this one here. So it's all about those reds and those yellows and those fiery colors. I've picked out some contrasting tones in like a darker red. I have like a pale yellow and a gold. And I intend to like break out like the bright yellow as well for this particular one. So like, just hopefully, I'm not used to working in such saturated colors anymore. I've been like living in this pastel land for such a long time that I'm really uncomfortable. But that's good. That means I must be learning something, right? So my first attempt at the feet came out way too big, and it was too early to tell how much smaller they actually needed to be. So I pivoted and worked on the belly instead. I started by swapping the double crochet stitches from the original with some treble crochets, but I just really didn't like how the texture was working up for this particular dragon. So I swapped to my latest favourite texture, which is made by alternating single crochets and spike stitches. It's just so nice. It's bobbly, but not too bobbly. Now, I'm a sucker for punishment, so even though the stitch texture of the body would have been perfectly fine, I decided I needed to cover the whole thing in scales. And not just any scales, specifically the 3 coloured spiral scales I used as features on Sprinkles the bakery dragon. And I'll bet you anything that this video is late because of it. The swirls on the first half were easy, just following the loops, but I wanted the second half to be like a mirror image of it, and so they were a little bit trickier, but honestly still very manageable. I'm gonna have to remember that for like future designs. At this point, I moved to a different space. I needed different energy, and I thought maybe moving to the kitchen table would help. And it did! But now the colours are very red and warm, so enjoy if you like that sort of thing. It's kind of made my skin look blue. I was trying to plan out the face here. I had a lot of doubts about whether or not this head shape would actually even work. It seemed very pointy. I wasn't feeling good about it. But layers solve problems. So I worked up a pronounced eyebrow ridge. And right around here is where my tripod broke, so the rest of my camera angles for this video will be either uninspired or really weird, and I look forward to finding out with you guys. And then I started working on like a nose piece. and I did it by making a shape that I could curl over into 2 different nostrils. I wanted 3-dimensional nostrils. 'Cause nostrils are really holes, and that means that you have to work on a way to build negative space. I was trying to steer into Chinese dragon reference images at this point, and a lot of them tended to have like manes instead of spines or spikes down their backs. So I started building up layers of fringe in a couple of different colours. I knew I was going to add more to this later, but I just started with a few for now. So then I went back to the feet and I made and assembled some in the correct size this time. Honestly, they didn't end up that much smaller than the originals, and you can still kind of see the toes from those original feet floating around in the background of the image. I was forced to start assembling at this point even though the pieces weren't made because I'd run out of pins. Someday I will remember that I need more pins when I'm in a position to acquire more pins, but today is not yet that day. So we started by sewing on the belly. Then started laying the base down for the face, which included the eyes, that eyebrow and the nose. Now I also did the fluffy sideburns at this point, but I did leave off the horns as well as the whiskers, just because I didn't want them getting caught on things while I sewed the rest of everything else together. So then I sewed the legs on, and I took my time here and just really made sure that he was stable and relatively balanced. I didn't put any kind of supporting armature or anything in him, so balancing those legs was kind of a make or break deal for this guy. Now, I adore how easy this looks on camera, but when I tell you the hours that went into making and sewing on that mane down his back, I will not be signing up for anything even close to that anytime soon. It was not as bad as feathers, but it's up there. It's definitely up there in one of my least favorite activities I've done in a while. Which is saying something, because once that was attached, I had to sew on like 60, 70 scales, something like that. Then finally, it was time to add those finishing details to the head, which basically were those horns, and a couple of whiskers just to really emphasize the fact that he is a Chinese dragon. Now, he needed a tail extension to feel pretty, and that's okay. I made him one, and a little frilly bit so he can wave coquettishly at passing lady dragons. Now I am going to show you what he ended up looking like, but first I just wanted to share some of the photos that I was sent over the last few days of the little dragon whose pattern came out last week. So let's just take a moment to appreciate how talented you guys are. For years I've been on the receiving end of all of these incredible photos of the different patterns that I've released, and it was just, it's time that I start sharing them so you can all start enjoying them and appreciating them as well. And there is my finished dragon. Sorry, this video is so late. Okay, bye. Yeah, kinda. No, not really. I don't know. Why?